Next one is buffer stocks. Now the buffer stocks, all governments do this because it makes a kind of sense. You can put, for example, processed food aside in case of a disaster. You can put tents and lorries aside in case of a disaster. You buy them up when there's a big supply and the demand is low. So you keep the industries in. You keep the industries going, but at the same time it doesn't cost you as much to buy, so you buy them at a premium, you buy in bulk, and then you store it. Okay, fair enough. To do this continually, however, which is what the EU does, you get the notorious butter mountains, the grain mountains, the milk lake, all the rest of it, the wine lake. All that's to do with the Common Agricultural Policy, which, what can you say about that? Is a disaster. Okay, a biggie. Number 5, tariffs. These are taxes placed on imported goods, and they protect national industries and services. I've just referred to one. The Chinese have, for example, placed a 402% tariff on high quality steel, such as is pretty much uniquely produced by the Port Talbot Steelworks. Subtly. Why? To protect their own ailing steel industry. Ironically, the Chinese steelworks actually only produce medium and low grade steel. I like this one. The United States has 127% tariff on imported paperclips. At least it did in 2013. That's The Economist, October 2013, page 11. Japan has a 78% tariff on rice imports. It just pushes prices up internally to the country where the purchase takes place. So the Americans have to pay a little more for their paper clips. It protects inefficient industries, unless of course the seller country is slapping a subsidy on their exports. So if you've got, say, China, and they are slapping a subsidy on their exports of steel, and you don't protect your industry with a tariff, then your industry can go out of business. So tariffs versus subsidies is a form of economic warfare, and that's what we're engaged in now. Incidentally, the United States has a 266% tariff against some Chinese steel imports. That's the Wall Street Journal, an article by Miller and Maudlin, 1/3/2016. Now, moving on a little, you will recall that the economists for Brexit, they called themselves, there were 8 of them, and they used a model of the UK economy completely outside the EU, and they used it to show that the UK would grow if it left the EU completely. Now, what they did was they created their own model. Now, these are independent people. They're professors. Patrick Minford, he's done an article called Brexit and Trade. I haven't referred to that. Gerard Lyons, The Impact of Brexit on the City and Financial Services. I haven't read that. Roger Bootle, the EU's poor economic record and the dwindling importance of the single market, and I haven't read that. Don't get me wrong, if I had done, I could add to what I'm saying. I don't want to. I want to try and keep this simple. So these people are genuine economic experts, and they deal with the EU, right? Now, how did their model work? Well, they assumed the complete removal of the UK tariff barriers, and admittedly a complete move out of manufacturing in the UK, which is completely unrealistic. But the point is, it's a model, and a pessimistic one at that. However, their model is more realistic than the one used by the following organisations, all of which use the same model, just in case you're wondering what I mean. The IMF, the CBI, the Treasury, the OECD. Same model to come to their conclusions. Patrick Minford, Daily Politics, BBC, 28/4/2016, describes these bodies as all Her Majesty's government's friends. The model that they use, the same model, out of the thousands that they could have used, has us all leaving EU regulation, all of it, and the tariffs in place. 4 to 5% EU trade tariff. It's a low tariff, but it would reduce UK's global trade. And let's face it, no UK government would leave it in place. It's ridiculous, either the regulations or the tariffs. Even the Cameron government wouldn't be stupid enough to do that. Even Osborne wouldn't be that thick. Oh dear. How can one respect these people? I can't manage it. Okay, back to Patrick Minford. Same programme on the single model used by the IMF, OECD, Treasury and CBI. I quote, "How many of them have done any work on it? What we've done is a lot of work on this. There is a glaring hole," I love that. There is a glaring hole in the modelling of the government. In a nutshell, is that they assume that we leave the tariffs of the EU intact when we leave. Our point is that this is crazy. That's his word, crazy. Because the big gain from leaving the EU is to get rid of the tariff and go to unilateral free trade. That is the WTO, the World Trade Organization, option. And when you do that, you unleash a whole dynamic of falling prices, food prices for the poor, of course very important, manufacturing prices. These are raised something like 20% by EU protectionism. 20%. That's an economy killer. Patrick Minford, BBC, Politics Today, 28/4/2016. Now, Minford's analysis and all the other ones, the other 8, have all used the same one. Based on a benchmark analysis that the UK does not have a trade agreement with the EU, which is completely unrealistic, in a pessimistic way. The benchmark calculation actually assumes that the UK does not put up tariffs, say against Mercedes, Germany, even if the EU puts tariffs on Jaguar. Take a look at the programme, and even then the UK is better off. No, that's not to say that's what the UK would actually do, and he does say that in the programme. Same man, same programme. All these august bodies you've talked about have not looked at this point. They've all assumed that when we leave the EU, we'll tamely carry on imposing the common external tariff on everybody outside. But the whole point of leaving the EU is to gain freedom over our commercial policy, our trade barriers, and to move to free trade. Again, later on, all these august bodies have forgotten that when we leave, the best policy is to get rid of all this. Every first year student taking economics at university knows that free trade dominates protectionism, and that Her Majesty's Treasury has forgotten is that free trade is good for the British economy. Let me read that without my interruptions. All these august bodies have forgotten that when we leave, the best policy is to get rid of all this. Every first year student knows that free trade dominates protectionism, and what Her Majesty's Treasury has forgotten is that free trade is good for the British economy. This is what all these great men and august bodies have not looked at. Follow what Patrick Minford says carefully, and you see that all the bodies, the IMF, CBI, OECD, Treasury, have all used the same model. Think about it. Thousands of models, and yet, by coincidence, they've all used the same one. Ooh. And that one would not be used by a first year economics student at university, an undergraduate, for goodness sake. Now, set aside Minford and his associates, whether they are right or wrong. And by the way, I do not accept that they're in the pay of Brexit or anybody else. They've chosen their side based on theory, based on economics. And I've got news for you, if you haven't already guessed. So have I. It's just the economics of the situation. What you can see is that the EU controls all EU border tariffs, including UK tariffs. And that's harmful to UK and international trade. It's harmful to UK international trade and to international trade. It soaks up money that doesn't need to be soaked up. Oh, by the way, it's also harmful to EU international trade. It means that the EU finds it harder to come out of recession, and we're connected to it. Next one, number 6, pollution. Now, these are the carbon emission permits, supposedly designed to reduce global pollution levels. In fact, of course, they do no such thing. It's got nothing to do with the EU, really. It's everywhere. The UK is involved in it, everybody's involved in it. It's simply a trading on permits to produce pollution that would be produced anyway. It's just money going round and round in circles, making some people a great deal of money and having no actual effect on the pollution levels. It's not relevant.